vBrownbag US. Tonight our presenter is going to be Rob Nelson. He is at rnelson0 on Twitter. He's going to be going over the auto-deploy deep dive. Before we get started with that, I'd like to run through a few quick show notes. First of all, we've got our Cisco certification track coming up. I'm actually really proud of this track. John Frappier, he's at jfrappier on Twitter. He took over our scheduling and presenter wrangling spot that we had a while back, and he's done a fantastic job with getting folks set up on the schedule. So starting May 13th, there's going to be a series of Cisco tracks going from May 13th to July 23rd. Some of the shows are going to be on the EMEA podcast, and the majority of the shows are going to be on the US podcast. But we're going to have folks like Chris Wall, Ed Henry, Scott McDermott, Tom Hollingsworth, Josh Cohen, Dan Bogda, and Lawrence Cohan on the show to talk about a wide variety of Cisco-related certification things. So we're going to be covering Cisco CCNA routing and switching, Cisco CCNA data center, CCNP, and CCENT. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope that you folks find some value in it. We've got the show schedule posted at professionalvmware.com. In addition, this week we just announced that Jeremiah Dooley, he's at jdooley_CLT on Twitter, he is joining the vBrownbag team. I don't know if anybody remembers or saw, but back on April 1st, Josh Atwell posted a gag on our website talking about vBrownbag Jr., and it was basically vBrownbag for kids. And we actually had a whole lot of people saying, that's a really awesome idea. So that got us to thinking that, hey, this might be a thing. So with Jay Dooley on now, he's going to be running the vBrownbag Jr. Side of things, as well as doing some statistics. I have confirmed that we are the world's largest virtualization podcast between all 5 or 6 of our podcast properties, which is an amazing thing, and definitely could not have done it without the community, since we don't make any money off of this. It's all community-based and community-supported, so thank you. We still haven't really defined what vBrownbag Jr. is yet. However, the planning is going to be going on over the next few weeks. I'm really excited about it. I think that extending the vBrownbag brand down to our children, I think that's actually really cool, and could potentially be one of the bigger and best things that we've ever done. So I'm really excited about it. So follow along on Twitter using the hashtag vBrownbag. You can follow any or all of the vBrownbag Twitter accounts. We've got at vBrownbag, at vBrownbag LATAM, at vBrownbag EMEA, and now at vBrownbag Jr. You can see all of our show times across the world on professionalvmware.com, as well as on this PowerPoint here. Again, my name is Damian Carlson. I'm 6'Dad on Twitter. Our guest tonight, or our presenter tonight, is Rob Nelson. He's at rnelson0, and he's going to be doing a deep dive on vSphere Auto Deploy. So, without further ado, Rob, I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Damian. My name is Rob Nelson. I'm going Auto Deploy deep dive tonight. I've got about 15 years experience in IT. Been working with VMware for the past 5. Like I say, I'm proud to say I got my VCP 5 DCV on Monday, so joining the ranks of the VMware certified professionals.
Hey,
you can find me on. Thank you. You can find me on Twitter at rnelson0 and my blog rnelson0.com. Like to keep it simple. I'm also going to be going through my deep dive series, and let me see. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I just realized, and I'm going to blame the antibiotics and head cold medicine, but I wasn't showing my screen at all during the intro, so sorry, everybody. But yeah, we can see it just fine. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to be going through the deep dive series that's on my blog and a lot of the material there. If you want, you can follow along at home or look at that tomorrow or later for reference. All right, so here's the agenda for tonight. First, I'm going to go over what auto-deploy is and some of the use cases that you might find in my home lab. Then I'm going to go into setting up and using auto-deploy. And then I'll finish up with troubleshooting and bonus points. I've had a few requests for how to do things with the VCSA and Linux only, either for people that love Linux or for resource-constrained labs. You can actually do auto-deploy in a very small lab. So what is auto-deploy? Here's the definition by VMware. It's pretty chewy. What it really is bare metal provisioning, throwing your ESX hypervisor on there automatically. Your servers can just be racked, stacked, cabled up, and hit the power button, and in a few minutes they're ready to go. It's also required reading for some certifications. As I said, I just got my VCP. I know it's on that test, and I believe it's on the VCP, the VCAP DCA certification. So you should at least have some passing familiarity with it before you take any of those certs. So our focus tonight, we're going to be using the vSphere web client. We know it's the way of the future. A lot of other tutorials for auto-deploy and a lot of examples from VMware are using the C# or thick client, but I'm going to show you where things have changed a little bit between the two clients. I'm also using some single service discrete VMs, so I've got vCenter and auto-deploy and some of the other features separated out. I'll show you where you can combine those if you'd like. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be going through a lot of the troubleshooting, show you what happens when things don't work. Nothing more frustrating than a tutorial that says do step A, do step B, and when you get done with step A, you don't know where to go because step B doesn't show up. So take a little bit of time to show how to troubleshoot auto-deploy. It is a pretty complex solution, a lot of moving parts. So before you begin, you want to know what the requirements are you need to meet. In production, you're going to need to have an Enterprise Plus license. You can, however, use the 60-day eval license that comes with all vCenter installations for your home lab or for a proof of concept at work. VMware's pretty upfront. You get that 60-day eval. It has all the features. Use it. No need to work around it. The reason you need Enterprise Plus is for host profiles. That's a feature that was introduced, I believe, in vSphere 5.0, and I'll be going through some of the details of that later. You're also going to need to provide DHCP and TFTP services. If you're using a Windows platform, I suggest a Microsoft DHCP server. People are probably very familiar with it, and SolarWinds makes a free TFTP server. On the Linux side, a lot of distributions include the ISC, DHCP, and TFTP services. If you've used Linux for a while, you've probably seen them. If not, they're pretty easy to pick up, and those are free as well. Next step is you need to be at least passingly familiar with PowerCLI as a whole, specifically the image builder commandlets. Your systems that you deploy need to support BIOS compatibility mode if they're EFI. If they're just regular BIOS mode, then you're good to go. If you use IPv6 on your network, you still need to have IPv4 at least for the initial boot of auto-deploy. And in your vCenter setup, you need to make sure that you've got everything you normally need to have for network security, storage. On the network and security side, if you've got these different services, DHCP, TFTP, the vCenter server itself, and the hosts that you're building all in different VLANs and networks, make sure you've got connectivity between them. Make sure your security policy allows the traffic. For the storage, about 350 meg per image. The default repository for auto-deploy is 2 gigs, so that gives you 5 to 6 images. You may want to increase that. And of course, make sure that you have administrative access. I imagine most people using auto-deploy, their users are going to be administrators. If you do decide to trim it down to some sort of pared down non-admin access, just make sure you have all the rights to register host, add objects to the cluster, that kind of thing. And if you need any more details on that, especially administrative access, VMware's vSphere install and setup guide is actually pretty good on this. It's got all the specifics. I'll actually be referencing 1 or 2 slides from it later tonight. There's a bit.ly link to it. So everybody's vCenter setup is going to look a little different, and this is what I'm I've got in my lab that I'm going to be referencing tonight, so I'll be doing some live demos as we go. The vCenter lab is segregated from my main setup, so I've got a firewall in between them, and I'm going to be using Lab Server 1 as my RDP gateway. I've got a Windows 2008 R2 domain controller, and the vCenter server is using that for SSO sign-ins. I've got auto deploy and TFTP on Lab Server 4, and Lab Unix 1 is a CentOS build with DHCP, and at the end I'm going to show you how to add TFTP if you want to use that instead of the Windows server. I've also got a machine called Test. All it's there is to be a DHCP client and make sure our DHCP setup works. I've got my my virtual physical host. I'm using nested ESXi here. The ESXi01 is my reference host. That guy's already built and configured. And then the ESXi02 and 03 are the hosts that we're going to deploy with auto deploy tonight. A little bit of difference there to show one of the issues that you can have with auto deploy is that the ESXi01 uses the VMware tools for nested ESXi fling from VMware. That allows me to install VMware tools, give me the balloon driver, the ability to shut down and restart ESXi gracefully, and most importantly, VMXNet 3 drivers. ESXi 02 and 03 don't have that because we're building the images from scratch, so they're using E1000 NICs. Slight difference, and just an example of something to be aware of when you build out your auto deploy. So the first thing that we need to do is set up an auto deploy VM. That's our Lab Server 4 from the previous slide. The OS requirements are the same as vCenter. You're in fact going to use the same media to install it. So in my case, I'm installing Server 2008 R2. You can use 2012 R2 if that's what your vCenter runs on. Follow whatever your corporate standards are to build a new VM. Really not much we're doing here, very specific, but I'm going to show the few changes we need to make. I'd suggest you at least get RDP running, unless you like doing everything through the VM consoles. And when we install SolarWinds TFTP, it requires .NET 3.5, but the free server, can't complain too much about it, but it's got a bum link to 3.5. So use the server manager roles and features for 2008 to install .NET. When you do that, you're going to see some prereqs that are in the IIS chain, but don't worry, they're just features that are for some reason associated with IIS. The web server is not installed, so you don't have to worry about locking that down. Once you've installed the TFTP server, add a firewall rule. If you are using 2012 or above, you can use PowerShell to do that, but we're going to do that through Server Manager. And the last step is attach the vCenter media, click on Install Auto Deploy from the Auto Start menu. And as you go through it, there's two things you want to pay attention to. When it asks you for your vCenter domain or IP plus credentials, use a credential that won't go away if somebody on your team leaves. In my lab, I'm using administrator at vSphere.local. You probably want to use a service account in production. And earlier I mentioned the repository. You can get about 5 or 6 images. During the install, it would ask you what size you want that to be. You can go ahead and crank that up to, 4 gig, 8 gig, whatever. If you don't use it, there's really no penalty, so I'd make it fairly large on install so you don't have to go back and touch it. Once you get auto deploy installed, the next thing that you need to do is grab some information so we can start populating our DHCP settings. So in the vSphere web client, we need to look at the vCenter object. There's a Manage tab, and you just pull up the auto deploy settings. The BIOS DHCP file name and the iPXE boot URL are going to provide us with the options 66 and 67 to the DHCP settings. And we also need to get a zip file that has all the files required for TFTP boot. Once you grab that zip file, you uncompress it in the TFTP root. You don't need to keep the zip. You can get rid of it. And I'll show you the URL for it. You don't actually have to access it through the vSphere web client because there's no protection on it, no authentication. So you can also bookmark that for later if you need it again in the future. Once you have that information, we need to modify the DHCP scope, and I'll show this in just a minute. One note here, for option 66, I use the next server command to set that. In the ISC documentation, I also found reference to the option TFTP server name that you can set. I found it didn't work out for me, so I don't know if that's an issue with the ISC documentation or if there's different DHCP clients that may look for different settings. You know, it's an RFC, and the great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. So just be aware if you find yourself not getting the response you want, maybe go ahead and set that value and see if that helps. And anytime you make a change in a Linux, in the ISC, DHCP, and Linux, make sure to restart the service. You can go ahead and make all the changes you want. If you don't restart the service, you're going to wonder why nothing's changed. So before I do the demo, Damien, are there any questions showing up so far?
No, not yet, but I did forget to add at the top of the show that if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me within the GoToWebinar interface, or tweet them at vBrownbag, or send them to the vBrownbag hashtag. Thanks.
Okay. Well, let's go take a look in my lab server. So the first thing that we were talking about was setting up the lab server itself. And I'm sorry I had to change the resolution right before, so bear with me. The SolarWinds TFTP server, I went through the install. It does take a little bit of time. Once you get it installed, you can bring up the dialog box for it. It's a service, so it runs whether you have this up. But this is nice. Shows you when the service started, and it shows you every client connection that happens. It shows you when they start. If they're interrupted, it shows you that, and if they're completed, it shows you. So you get some pretty good logging here without really having to dive very deep into log files that you probably wouldn't understand without spending a little time on it. Down here in the bottom left, it shows you the directory that it's using for the TFTP root. If for any reason you need to change that, just come up to File, select Configure, and you can set that down here. Don't think you have to restart it, but worst case scenario, just hit stop and start after you change it.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Was there a reason why you decided to use SolarWinds versus something like TFTPD 32?
This was free, and I knew about it.
Right on. Yeah, I didn't know if there was some additional feature or something that set it apart from the other one.
No, I started using it, like I said, mostly because it's free, but I also do like the fact that right here you can see every time something connects to it, it shows up right here, so you don't have to go in and start looking for logs. They're immediately visible. Yeah,
that's definitely handy.
Okay. So the URL, and sorry I got to slide around. As I said, I had to change the resolution a little bit. The URL for grabbing the deploy TFTP, and I'll show you where you find that in the vSphere in a second, is right here. You can actually chop this part out here, and you'll find this in my blog series as well, and replace this with your auto-deploy server name, and that URL should be intact as long as you kept all the defaults. If you change the port during the install, just adjust for the port, and this path here on the end should be the same for everybody's deployment. Once you grab that file, all you need to do is expand it here in the TFTP root. This is just TFTP root as shown in the vSphere client. This is what the unpacked directory looks like, and you notice there's no zip. You don't have to keep that around. And the last part is Server Manager. Sorry about the resolution here, but here's my inbound rules. I just click New Rule here and follow the wizard to set up a rule. Like I said, if you've got 2012, you can use PowerShell to do it, but it's just an inbound rule. TFTP is port 69 UDP, nothing fancy to it. Once you've got the auto-deploy system itself set up, then you come over here, and we're going to go into the vCenter server. And there's a couple different ways to get to the vCenter object. You can pull it from almost any of these tabs up here. I'm just going to go home to vCenter and find it this way. And I'm doing RDP and RDP, so Damien, if this is not pulling up fast enough, let me know.
Oh, no, it seems to be good.
Okay, good. When you come in here to the vCenter object, go to the Manage tab, Settings, and Auto Deploy. If you don't have Auto Deploy set up, this won't show up. If your Auto Deploy VM is offline, Auto Deploy will show up, and this side will be blank. So that'll let you know that when this is populated, it's registered properly, and Auto Deploy should work. Up here at the top, this is the option 67, the boot file name. This is going to be the same for everybody out there. And then here in the iPXE boot URL, the IP address is what we need for the DHCP next server option. That's option 66. And if you really want to, here's where you click and get that raw URL for the boot zip. Once you've got that, we'll take a look at the DHCP config. If you're not familiar with the ISC DHCP config, it's pretty simple. It's going to be an etc DHCP. There's the DHCP.conf and the DHCPD.conf. If you want the one with the D, that's the service statement. So the config's very simple. We've got a scope that we've defined here. Here are all the different options that you would see for a normal scope, like gateway, netmask, domain name, DNS server, time server, the range that it's handing out, and then the lease time. And I've gone ahead and I've added in the auto deploy setting. So option 66 is our next server. I've got that other conflicting option commented out. As I said, you can add that in if you find you need it. I've had both enabled at the same time and not seen any weirdness, so you can always just go ahead and add it just in case. And option 67 goes right here. I'll be showing you some of this later, but here's the hardware or the reservations for our virtual hardware. And as I said, whenever you make changes here, make sure you restart it. You just use service DHCPD restart. And when you do that, you should see OK for a shutdown and OK for a startup, for starting. If you see failed here, what it usually means is you left, say, the semicolon off here. So make sure that it comes back with OK, not failed. If it does, it means you've got to fix your configuration. All right. And once you're done with DHCP, the next thing to worry about is the host profile. As I mentioned earlier, this requires Enterprise Plus licenses. These can get really tricky, but the goal behind them is you take one host. In my case, that VESXi01. I've got that device configured the way I want it. I've got the password set. I've got NTP, syslog, storage, all that set up the right way. And then you can extract that host profile and then apply it to other machines. Now, the host profile has what they call the machine-specific, which is the hardware components and setup. And then there's an answer file, which is the host-specific information. That would be the host name for each VM kernel port, your IP, subnet mask, MAC address, that kind of thing. And by applying that, each machine should get the same config. Now, it is very tricky, and it's very specific. It could be an hour-long vBrownbag on its own. So I'm going to keep it real simple tonight, but I want to let everybody know if you haven't used host profiles before, they are very powerful. It's worth the time to try and get things right, but we're going to keep it simple tonight. So you can't edit a host profile from scratch. You have to extract it from a host. So I'm using VESXi01 as the reference host. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a stateful profile, and I'm just going to uncheck everything except for one setting, and that's the system image cache settings down here. Here's the hierarchy for it. And we're just going to make sure that enable stateful installs on host is the value for it, and that setting is selected to apply. Other things you can do, root password, syslog NTP. If you do have a host that's connected to your vCenter, maybe your predecessor set it up and you don't know what the root password is, you can easily create a host profile that has nothing applied except for the root password, set it to a known value, apply it to the box, and recover the password that way. So there's a lot of things you can do with host profiles beyond what I'm showing you tonight. Now, that said, if your hardware is all the same, use the full profile. And when I say all the same, I mean all the same. If you've got a bunch of boxes and they've all got the same hardware in them, but you took, say, a network card and you put it in a different PCI slot, the host profile is going to fail. So it's very specific. With that in mind, and you've probably heard it a lot on the vBrownbags, automation is a great way to automate crap. So always test with one device with your host profiles because they are so tricky. Get it right before you go and make 99 more machines that don't work right. All right, and Damien, I'm going to go in and do another demo now. Any other questions?
Not really question. Well, yeah, actually, I've got a question from Sean Cook and a couple comments from Graham Mitchell. Sean Cook asked, in reference to VESXi 02 and 03, with no VMware tools playing, can that be easily deployed post-auto-deploy or baked into the image?
With the nested EXI, I'm not sure because you have to define certain things up front to have the VMXNet drivers working. So I haven't played around with that too much. I think there's a way to do it, and I'll show you how you can customize an image to add those, the VIB for the nest for those drivers. But I haven't tried it myself, so I can't say if that would work or not.
Okay. And then the comments from Graham. He said that TFTP won't forward over collision domains, and that you can also set the SolarWinds TFTP server to restrict which hosts and subnets it listens to, since otherwise it doesn't have any security. A few other comments were that he says that boost profiles can only be applied in maintenance mode, and that they can be difficult for storage and even worse with a stretched cluster. Do you have any comments on those lines?
Yeah, so host profiles, the goal with a host profile is that you can get that one config from one device and just plop it on others. In reality, in a production setup at work, I've got some Blade servers. They're all exactly the same. They're all plugged into the same Blade chassis. And I was able to extract a profile from one, and then we go to throw it on the other, and we get errors. So we actually have two host profiles. We have one host profile that's the initial settings, and then after we apply those and remediate that host profile, then we have a second host profile that puts the storage on. According to all the VMware documentation, you should be able to do that in one host profile, but we were never able to get it to work. They are tricky. Now, other machines we've been able to take one host profile that includes storage. They were rack servers, not Blade servers. And when I applied that host profile to another machine, it worked fine. So there's some caveats, and I'm going to get into some of those as we go. But yeah, they can be really tricky, and I'll show some other ways to get around some of the gaps that I've encountered with them.
Yeah, I totally admit that I haven't used them recently, just because I'm not really in a technical role anymore, or at least not a hands-on technical role. But I think probably like vSphere 5. When I first started using them, I found them to be a giant pain in the behind. Just difficult to fix and debug, and I really hope they've gotten better.
Yeah, they can drive you to drink, but it's really a matter of.
I was going to drink anyways.
I think if you can get 95% of what you need done with host profiles, you're in a good spot. Trying to go from 95 to 100%, it might take you an hour to get to 95%. It could take you a week to get that last 5%, and if it's taking you a week, it's not worth your time. If you're lucky and everything works out and you can get the whole thing done in 2 hours and everything works, hooray for you. If not, I wouldn't worry about it. There's some other ways to get around that.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. So getting into the host profiles, back in the vSphere web client, we go to the home page, and right here in the middle is host profiles. Now, I've already extracted the host profile. The way to extract the host profile is click on the green plus sign up here and choose our VESX01, click Next, give it a name and description, hit Finish. It does take a little bit of time. That's why I've done it ahead of time. And the other thing you can do is, because I'd actually want to apply this back onto VESX01 when I'm done, I leave this alone. This button up here is our duplicate host profile. You can also right-click and do it, and I created a stateful one. So originally the stateful was the same thing as this. Now, if I right-click on it, I can edit the settings, and when we get into the settings, we'll see what changes I've made. which is I unchecked everything. So be aware the ones with the folders, for some reason, I don't know why you have to hit the little down arrow and then uncheck all these. I don't know why they don't just have a top-level checkbox for them. So the setting that we care about is advanced configuration settings, system image cache configuration, and then for some reason, another quirk of host profiles, another system image cache configuration. When you click on this last one, there's one setting up here that has a pull-down. Default is enable stateless caching. We're just changing it to enable stateful installs. There's arguments here for first disk. This is using local. There is an argument for using SD cards and probably some other arguments you can give here. I definitely refer you back to that vSphere install and setup guide for all the specifics on that. Make sure what you're doing is right. You can probably guess at a lot of it, but it's best to check. So once we've got that set up, just click Finish and it'll apply, and that's our host profile. Like I said, I'm keeping it simple. When we take a look at this guy here, and we go in, and we can expand down here, the storage configuration, there is a bunch of stuff in here. And you will find that it will be one little thing buried under one other little thing. You know, this rat's nest goes down pretty far. So if you start adding in some software, iSCSI initiators, this thing gets huge. This is probably where you'd have most of the problems with host profiles. So worst case scenario, if you go to your machines and you uncheck that, you're still applying some of the general like network configuration for DNS, or you're applying your DV switch without getting into the storage issues. Any other questions on before I go on, Damien?
No, sir. Looking good.
Okay. So I'm using the stateful. That's obviously not the default that's provided, which is stateless. So why would you want to use stateful? Well, in my home lab, I've got a small system. In production, a lot of us have management clusters that we don't want to have external dependencies. So I've got 2 hosts at home. Those hosts are running my DHCP server and my auto-deploy server. It's not going to work too well for me if I'm trying to boot off of the VMs that are on the hypervisors that lost power because we had a hurricane come through the area or something. So that would be a good use case. If you don't have Enterprise Plus and you want everything to work after the eval expires, probably good to use stateful. In essence, doing stateful is the same as popping a CD in, going through and taking all the defaults, but not actually doing that. It's the same image. And in reality, you know, we're doing a lot of nested stuff here in a lab. But in reality, it's going to take a long time to boot. If it takes 30 minutes to go through all the BIOS and then the Pixie boot and then the install, and you got 4 devices in a cluster, that might mean that you need a 2-hour window just to do anything. So something to keep in mind. Maybe that's not a big deal for some people. Maybe it is. Now, stateless is the default, and there's good reason. You can deploy 100 machines that have the same settings with a single rule, and you don't have to touch any of them. You just plug them in, turn them on, they get it, they get the image, and then you can upgrade and downgrade them. You can add and remove VIBs, basically the different packages like the VMware tools or network drivers and multipath, that kind of stuff. You can put those all in an image, and if you wanted to, say, go from ESXi 5.5 to 5.5 update 1, you can create a new image, reboot 1 or 2 of your VM hosts, make sure they work all right, and then either reboot the rest of them or downgrade back to 5.5 and reboot those 2 devices. And, you know, it's a pretty quick and painless upgrade-downgrade process for most people. So, again, I'm mostly using stateful here because my home lab has some external dependencies, and it's really easy to show host profiles. But there's a lot more you could do with stateless. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to jump into PowerCLI and the image builder commandlets. If you haven't used PowerCLI, you should. We've had, I don't know what, vBrownbags on it in the past few months. If you know PowerShell, if you've done much Windows administration, you probably know that, so you're halfway there. It's just extended commandlets on PowerShell. So up at the top, I've got the commands that we need to be concerned about for Image Builder. Obviously, we need to connect to our vCenter server. The next two commands, we're going to get some information. We're going to attach our devices to a cluster and attach a host profile, so we have to grab those. We're going to use a host range pattern. I'll show you some of the other patterns that can be used for the rules. We also need to add a remote or offline software depot, and I'll show you the difference between those two in a couple slides. We're going to, from that depot, select an ESX image profile. That would be like 550 and some update if you're coming off like the VMware public repository or the 510 or 50, whatever you need. Then you have to create a deploy rule, and then you can either set the deploy rule set that'll override existing rules, or if you just are adding to it, use the add deploy rule. If you do need to do the customization, like adding the VIBs, if you want to add the nested ESX, that's the VMware tools for nested ESX, that's a VIB. If you went from 5.1 to 5.5, and a lot of people have white box machines in their lab and you lost your Realtek drivers, add the VIB for it. And then you can also export that ESX image profile into a zip bundle or ISO. You could, use that to, even if you're not doing auto deploy, you can still use the image builder commands there to create an ISO to actually pop in a machine and configure things that way if you need to. And here's an example script for what I'm doing in my lab tonight. Connect VI server, there's my vCenter server name. We're grabbing, I've only got one cluster, so we're just grabbing that, putting it in a variable, grabbing the host profile called Stateful, putting that in a variable, and there's my host pattern. This is just host 241 through 249 in my 172.19.00 subnet. I'm adding the public repo from VMware. That's just their mainline one. You can use your public Dell or HP or whatever vendor depot you have, and there's also ways to create offline depots. And if you need to do a customization, I've commented it out, but that's where you would do it. Clone an existing profile, add VIBs, export if you need to. And then we choose the image profile that we want to use. In this case, ESXi 550 in that timestamped version. Save that to a variable as well. And then we'll create a new deploy rule, and I'll go through the specifics on the next slide, but we give it a name, we throw it the items that we've saved, and the pattern that we define. And those items are the host profile, image profile, and cluster. And then I'm overwriting my rules, and the last rule is get deploy rule set. It doesn't really matter when you use set deploy rule set since we know what we're overwriting, but if you were enhancing, if you're adding to rules, that's important because that'll show you the full rule set, so you make sure that the rule that you just added works the way you expect it to. And before I go on, one thing I forgot on the previous slide, down here, additional VIBs. It's a little tricky sometimes because you can't just take a driver and add it. You've got to turn it into a VIB first. That link there goes to Chris Wall's Wall Network blog. He's got some great articles on where you can get VIBs and how you can turn drivers into VIBs if you need to do it yourself.
Chris Wall, huh? That guy.
Yeah, that guy.
I'm kidding. He's a great guy, and he's actually going to be presenting on our Cisco track. I just like to sometimes.
Yeah, no, he's got some good stuff on the VIBs, though. So that new deploy rule, let's go over that now. If you haven't used PowerShell very much, you might not be aware, everything's objects. When you do something like a get host profile stateful, it returns to the screen the word stateful, but really it's returning an object, so it's not just text. When we run that new deploy rule, it uses two things, an auto deploy rules engine and the auto deploy server to determine how to parse things. It's very intelligent. When you give it the image profile, the rules engine says, when I see a new host that's trying to do an auto deploy rule, this is the image I give it. And then when you give it the host profile, it says, okay, after that image is loaded on the machine, I need to apply this host profile. And then the cluster, it says, okay, now register it with vCenter and then put it in this cluster. The rules engine does that magic, and then the auto deploy server is what actually serves up that data to the clients. So our rule is doing all that at once. Apply the image, the host profile, and the cluster. You can certainly set your rules up in whatever order you want. You can have a rule that does the image, a rule that does the host profile. It'll still turn out the same way. One reason you might want to do that is if you bought, say, 64 of the same machine to build out two 32-node clusters, you can't add them all to the same cluster because you can only have 32 in one. So you could have one rule that deploys the image and the host profile, and then 2 more rules for each cluster. Say, the top half of the network goes to cluster 1 and the bottom half to cluster 2. And I think, Damien, you said it was Grant that mentioned the host profiles. They get attached for compliance. When you do auto deploy, that's on purpose. Now, if it tries to attach it for compliance and it fails compliance, like say you have hardware mismatches or the storage doesn't work out because host profiles are a little tricky, it'll show a yellow shield if it's a warning, or a red warning or red failure if that's the case. Those aren't going to abort the auto deploy process, but since you're trying to automate everything, spend the extra time to make sure that your host profile doesn't generate errors when you throw stuff out. Now, you can get failures that will abort the process, and you'll know that. But if it shows up in vCenter, you can host VMs. It just means it doesn't match the host profile that you set. And one last note on PowerShell, that software depot that we add, that's only for the session. So make sure you save your script. If you need to go back and add a VIB to a customized profile, when you open a new session, you can't see that profile. And there's no way that I've found to reverse engineer what's in the rules engine to build it back out. So save your script, and that way you can edit it later when you need to. And a note on the software depots. If you use the remote one, like I'm using the public VMware or a HP or Dell, when you make your first rule that uses one of those image and all the VIBs that are attached to it, it's going to go out and download all those VIBs. So if your vCenter network doesn't have internet access, create an offline bundle. And I think you can find the link for that on Chris Wall's blog as well, and there's certainly a lot of other blog articles out there that tell you how to create an offline bundle. Might also be good if you're in a low bandwidth, high latency environments as well. Any other questions before I go to the next demo, Damien?
No questions, but Brandon Mitchell did have a couple other comments that came into the questions interface. This is actually referring to a few slides ago, but one of them is that Patch Manager won't work on stateless, and that you can also add drivers and things like the Nexus 1000D to the image.
Okay, what was the first one you said?
That Patch Manager doesn't work on stateless.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so when you do the Patch Manager, the way to get your patches on is to make a new image with the patch and then deploy that the next time you boot a device. Right.
Because otherwise, if you patched it, as soon as you reboot it, you'd be right back to where you were before.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Cool.
Yep. Good thing to consider. All right. So here is a PowerShell ISE window where I've already run my script. It's just like described on this slide, except I took the commented section out. Connect, get the cluster, get the profile, set the host pattern, add the depot, and then select our image profile and apply it. So in the output here, you can see connects to vCenter, adds the depot URL. Now, because this is my lab, I've done a lot of stuff ahead of time. The new deploy rule gives an error because it already exists. If it doesn't exist, it'll just spit out the output of the rule that it just created. Set deploy rule set shows you the rules that it just applied, and like I said, get deploy rule set does the exact same thing since I'm overwriting it, but that's where you display the full thing. Now, since this session is here. If I do a get ESX software depot, I see the software depot, and if I get an ESX image profile, I get the whole list of images that are in that repo. Now if I go over here, I've got another PowerShell ISE connected to the same vCenter server, but this is a new session. So get ESX software depot returns a big fat nothing. And same thing for get ESX image profile. So big thing is make sure you save this script here. If you need to go and add vib, you can do it. And in the vSphere documentation, you've got other patterns you can use. I think for most people using the IPv4 ranges, you can do comma separated. Should be pretty good. But if you wanted to, and your servers that you buy support SIM correctly, CIM, you can use models. You could have builds for, say, R910s versus R20s from Dell or whatever your model is, your vendor, serial, all these different things. So, you know, if you're going to do something like that, just make sure that your vendor supports whatever pattern you want to use. All right, and we're almost done with deploying things. So now that we've got the image built, last thing that we need to do before we can boot a device, create a DHCP reservation. I showed this in the config before. Here's the one for VESXi02. It's one per VM host. Make sure it's in the correct scope. Make sure it's in the range that's defined by the auto deploy rules. And again, make sure you restart your service. I'd also suggest that you make sure that the option host name is set here. If this matches your DNS settings, then it'll show VESXi02 in vCenter when it's all done. If not, it'll show the IP address. I don't know about you guys. I don't like to have IP addresses show up when I can have host names. So if you get the DNS and the DHCP reservation lined up, everything's great. So now we're all ready. We can power on our V hardware, start the Pixie boot, and because security is always important, sudo make me a sandwich. And when you come back a few minutes later, you'll have a VM host that's running the image you specified. It'll be in the cluster, and all you need to do is take it out of maintenance mode to start using it. So I'm going to start us on that. So I've got VESXi02 here. Now I booted this guy a while ago. I didn't have auto deploy running, so it didn't have anything to connect to. You can see here, operating system not found. In a second, I'm going to restart it, and what we'll see is it's going to go pretty quick because this is next. We'll see the network boot from the Intel E1000E. It'll get a DHCP address, then it'll get a TFTP boot image, and then it'll get the VMware boot image, and it'll start booting the ESXi installer, and then and that part's going to go pretty quick. And then about 5 minutes later, ESXi will be installed, and everything will be good to go. So we'll start that magic now. So there's getting DHCP. Here's the Pixie boot, VMware build. You can see there's the name that we put in before. And now it's loading ESXi. So it's that simple. Now, on the other hand, I've got VESXi.
57 steps later.
Yeah, 57 steps later. But as far as the host is concerned,
43.
all you had to do was turn it on. So, you know, like everything else with automation, if you put the time in up front, on the back end, it's very quick.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and here's the ESXi03. Now I did cheat with this guy, and I did the auto deploy first, and I wanted to show you guys with this one. So you saw what the boot process looked like when there's no operating system. If I hit F12 here, and because we haven't done anything with our host profile, was why I emphasized the root password, still set the blank. So if you're going to follow these steps at home, make sure you at least set that in your host profile. If I hit restart here, this is going to take a little time, so it's going to do a proper shutdown. We'll see this guy, he's going to reboot. There's not going to be any Pixie boot because we did stateful. It's going to detect the OS, it's going to load it, and we're going to come up a lot faster than ESXi02 over here on the left. So this is going to take about 5 minutes. I don't know if there's any other comments or questions to address while we're waiting on this.
No, folks have been rather quiet. Interesting. I think you're just communicating so much knowledge that it just, you know, kind of eliminates the need for questions. I'm going to go with that one.
Well, I hope people are, here's ESXi03. So you can see this guy went straight from the VMware BIOS right into loading VMware ESXi. It's not downloading anything. It's all set since we did the first stateful install. So like I said, we're going to be waiting on this guy for a little bit, but I don't want to switch back to PowerPoint slides and hide the most exciting part of auto deploy. Nobody else got any questions?
Yeah, actually, we've got a couple coming through here. Sean Cook wants to know if you go to a new update, so for example, from 5.5 to 5.5U1, how do you tell stateless to update?
So the way you tell stateless to update is you go back to PowerShell, you create a new rule for the new image that you want to use, and you reboot those machines. When they boot next time, they're going to come up and get it. If you did stateful, sorry, did you say stateless or stateful?
Stateless.
So if it's stateless, the next time it boots, it's going to go back out to auto deploy, look for the image. Auto deploy is going to tell it to load the new image as long as your rule was crafted right, and then you're good to go. Now, if you did stateful, you can still do it. You just need to go into the BIOS and force a PXE boot. On my Dell machines, I just have to wait till all the BIOS goes through, and before it actually boots the OS, I got a chance to hit F12. If you're doing nested, just use the option to force it into BIOS on next boot, and make sure you just put PXE up at the top. And same thing if you later decide you want to downgrade. Just change your image builder rules with the new image that you wanted to deploy, and reboot the host that you want to upgrade or downgrade.
And then Zach has a question. He wants to know if it is possible to use auto deploy without host profiles.
As far as I know, no. Now, there are other provisioning processes out there. ENC Viper is one. I actually saw on Planet V12N, I suspect most people here probably have that in their RSS feed. Somebody just came up with a way to do provisioning using Ubuntu, TFTP, and some other magic. I kind of skimmed through it today. But there's more than one way to skin the cat. But with auto deploy itself, you need to use host profiles.
Gotcha. Sean Cook actually has a clarification to his question earlier. He actually meant stateful. So for example, he says, if you have a fleet of physical boxes and you can't sit for the boot order screen to select, is there any way to force it?
No, there's no way to force it with auto deploy. There's still other ways to do upgrades. There is a command through ESXCLI somehow. I don't remember the syntax for it, but you can give it a public repo and an image name, and it'll actually go out, download that, and apply it to itself and reboot. I definitely want to make sure you're in maintenance mode before you do anything like that, though. But yeah, if you can't get into the BIOS and force the PXE boot, you can't bring it back to auto deploy as far as I know.
Okay. Graham Mitchell actually has a ton of really good comments in here. So let's see, let's work through them. First one, he says that you don't have to run the scripts on vCenter. You can do it on workstations with the right security set. Do you have any comments on that, Rob?
Does he mean to have like a nested ESX set up in VMware Workstation?
No, I believe he's actually referring to the PowerCLI scripts.
Oh, the PowerCLI scripts I'm not running on vCenter, but I've got to connect to vCenter because this is almost done. I don't want to hide it. Let me see if I can move this over here. So when you're running these rules, this deploy rule goes into the auto deploy rules engine and auto deploy server, which are part of vCenter. So the PowerShell or PowerCLI itself doesn't have to be run on the vCenter server. You just need to be connected to it to make those changes apply.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So that's actually what he was referring to. It looks like Jeremiah Dooley has a question, and Jeremiah, I know you're new here, so I won't make fun of you, unless you were actually polling the audience. But the question is, what are the requirements or recommendations for bandwidth between vCenter/AutoDeploy and the host? And will large clusters suffer if they all reboot at once?
I haven't checked on the bandwidth it uses. You saw the download part took about a minute, and as I said before, the image is about 350 meg. So, you know, that's probably good for most even gig networks. If you're at 10 gig, you probably don't have anything to really worry about there. If you do have a large setup where you're going beyond like a single cluster where you've got 1,000 hosts, yeah, I imagine you could have some issues with like a boot storm like you would with VDI. I certainly don't have availability to that level of scale, but to know what it is. But yeah, I definitely say if you're going to be working at that kind of scale, you want to do some analysis, make sure you don't have any choke points. DHCP you can distribute. TFTP is not as easy, but there's probably some ways to kind of replicate that out. Maybe, you know, I've never looked at a TFTP load balancer if there's a way to do that. But, you know, if you have multiple vCenter servers, auto deploy is one-to-one with vCenter. I don't know of a way. The documentation says it's one-to-one, so I don't think there's a way to do multiple auto deploy servers with a single vCenter. But I guess you could, if you had that kind of scale and were worried about boot storms, you could set up multiple vCenter servers and multiple auto deploy and TFTP servers.
Cool. Thank you. I think that exhausts the questions from the webinar. Let me go check on Twitter.
Yeah, this is another great part about host profiles. If anybody's used these, when you get to the host profile part, we know that our host profile is one thing to apply, but it takes forever. This part will take a good long while, and then it'll probably zoom through the rest of this, but we're almost there.
Okay. Yeah, no other questions that I can see.
All right, like I said, I don't want to hide anything there. Maybe we can do it like this, but if we come back over here and take a look at our host and clusters, we can see ESXi 03. I did reboot that. It'll probably take a little bit of time to, nope, it did reconnect. So I was just saying that the default password hasn't been changed, but here we have, it's a member of AD Lab, which is the only cluster I have. So it's joined it, and down here is our host profile compliant. So it's got the stateful profile applied to it. It's showing itself as compliant, and the last check date is when I set it up yesterday. If you haven't used host profiles, one of the funky things about them is they apply a compliance check, but only when you tell them to. So if you ever make changes to your host profiles, you actually have to come back and redo compliance checks on all the hosts that have it attached. So just not really related to auto deploy, but something to be aware of. That's caught us off guard a few times before we made adjustments to our workflow for that. All right, so we're past the host profile, and this part's hopefully going to come up real quick, and then I can move on to troubleshooting. So as I had mentioned earlier, if you have your physical boxes that have a lot of BIOS to go through, it takes a long time. But here, even with nested ESXi and no real BIOS to go through, you can see this still does take quite a bit of time. So that's another reason why I went with Stateful in my lab. I don't want to have to wait for 30 minutes for a box to reboot. Almost there, I swear. All right, here's our final boot. Aren't live demos the best? All right, so it hasn't registered yet. But we really are almost there. So I know we're at the top of the hour, and I've still got a bit to go through. So I'm going to try and move through the next part fairly fast, unless people have time to hang out. But definitely want to get this device in here and show you it works before I go on.
Yeah, that's absolutely no problem. I don't really have anything else planned tonight except maybe watch Anchorman 2. Or play some Xbox One. I don't know. The sky's the limit.
That's a good movie, though.
Anchorman 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I missed it in the theater, so I'm looking forward to watching it.
Do you know if that's the theater version, or are they giving you the, I don't know if you saw, they came out with an extended one with some extra jokes.
The unrated one.
Okay.
Which in the context of a PG-13 movie, it's like, ooh, unrated. It's going to be so crazy.
I apologize for the long wait here. I would have gone through some of the other parts, but I swear it only took about 5 minutes when I did ESXi 03.
That's quite all right. Sometimes you can't quite do the cooking show approach with these sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all spent probably more of our lives than we'd like to admit watching things boot.
Well, I haven't hit any blue or purple screens, so I'm going to count that as a success. And we'll see, because I'm not sure when it adds it. Okay, it hasn't added it yet. Any other comments coming in while we're waiting? Oh, here we go. Okay, so here we've got our device. You can see it's got a DHCP address, and hopefully if I click refresh here, it'll show it in the cluster. There we go. All right, I've got a red mark. What's that? Okay, nothing big. It's just showing that the quick stats aren't up to date and the default password hasn't been changed. Nothing we wouldn't expect since the machine's just been added to the cluster. But you can see it's putting it where we want it to. This also has the host profile applied, and it should be checking compliance and show that soon. And so that's an auto deploy. So going back to our slides. So here's what we've done. We've got the one-time steps, the auto deploy service and VM, installation and configuration of TFTP, and then your repeated steps. Every time you go out and add a bunch more hosts that you want to auto-deploy, update your DHCP config, your host profile, select or create a new one, update your image builder, images and rules, deploy the host, rack, stack, cable, power on, make a sandwich. You've done good work. You deserve a meal. And your machines are now online and ready to host VMs. So the software-defined data center, this is really step one, your bare metal hypervisor. As I mentioned, there's Viper. I think somebody also said that they're able to do Pixie Boot and Kickstart on Twitter. There's a number of other ways to do it, but this is the VMware way to do it. But it's really just the start because we're still having to do some touch. So there's some ways to increase your automation. So the most logical would be to apply that more complete host profile. Next would be automate 4 components: DNS, DHCP, host profiles, and image builder. The goal would be tie that all into a single workflow, maybe have a web page. You go, you order 100 machines from your vendor, somebody gets a little, basically makes a list, okay, here's the MAC address, here's the IP address, and the host name we're going to give it. Do that for all 100 boxes, click OK, it fires off that workflow, and then when all the boxes arrive on site, they can rack, stack, cable, power on, and you've got the, the big sell is always have your data center up and running in 60 minutes. Like you said, Damien, as long as you don't count the hundreds of man hours you had to put in up front, you've got your data center in 60 minutes. But it does make things really easy on the back end. I do suggest if you do look at auto-deploy and you start to do something like this in production, take small steps. If you try and make that gigantic workflow and you have a problem, now you've got to troubleshoot DNS, DHCP, host profiles, and image builder. Get one part working and then just iterative designs, and you'll get there.
Yeah, as far as automation goes, I remember seeing a graphic a while back of, and I forget where it was, kind of comparing time spent on doing something manually versus doing something in an automated fashion. And initially, you invest more time getting the automation set up and then 0 time from there on out, whereas if you do it manually, you always have to keep doing it manually, and then cumulatively, you end up spending a whole lot more time on it.
Yeah.
That is providing you're not OCD like myself and you spend way more time refactoring and getting pretty with your code and being stupid.
Well, and necessity is the mother of all invention, right? The reason I started working on auto-deploy is because I got a new server for Christmas that I wanted to host things on. I bought it without any optical media because who needs that in this day and age? And that's when I realized it has a USB port on it, but I needed a firmware update for it to boot off the USB stick, which the only firmware update I could do was via USB, so it's a catch-22. So I was really forced into using auto-deploy to get my machine up and running. So, if you got the need, this becomes very easy to iterate through. If this is a side project, you're probably going to spend, a lot more time on things and trying to get things perfect. But for me, I needed to just get it up and running. So it was a good exercise for me. It's a great way to get involved in something like auto-deploy and get started on it. But if you are doing things at scale, this or some other similar setup would definitely be the way to go to get started. So I'm about to move into troubleshooting. Any other comments or questions?
Grant Mitchell mentioned that, sorry, I got sidetracked. My gosh, thanks for nothing, stupid head cold medicine. Grant Mitchell wanted to mention that Dell also does bare metal deployment, including file settings, RAID config, firmware, etc. And then Steve Richards wanted to say, he says, thanks for the demo. I have a project of 800 hosts, and I'm thinking of doing this in-house with auto-deploy instead of paying the vendor $400,000 to do it for me. That's awesome, Stephen. Feel free to send all of us $100,000, and we'll be cool.
Yes, I take personal checks. But yeah, if you got 800 hosts, definitely you want to do something like this to help yourself out, especially when it comes time to do the next upgrade.
Yep. Just make sure you write it out to my shell corporation in the Caymans. 1099s aren't cool. but yeah, other than that, I think we're good to go.
All right. So troubleshooting, as I mentioned at the top, there's nothing I hate worse than starting a tutorial and getting to some point where they tell me to click on a button that doesn't exist. So here's some of the problems I ran into and just general guidelines of how to troubleshoot auto-deploy, because it does have so many moving parts. As always, with any troubleshooting thing you do in IT, don't start with the specific problem you think you have. Start with the physical layer, work your way up. First issue I had was Pixie and switch configs. The Pixie client will get DHCP, auto-deploy would build the vSphere host, and then DHCP on vSphere would fail. Well, it's because Pixie was picking up the native VLAN, and I had a trunked port. I wanted vSphere to be able to, host multiple VLANs, and it wasn't selecting. It wasn't dropping down to the native VLAN. Now, I use TrendNet in my home lab. I use Cisco at work, so there were some differences in what I expected, but the official VMware recommendation there is not to use trunked NICs or trunked interfaces for booting. I only got the 2 interfaces on my machine, so I kind of had to. For me, it was boot off of an access port and then just move the cable over to the trunk one when I was done. But in production, hopefully you've got enough NICs that you can dedicate one. If you got 12 NICs, you can use 10 of them and dedicate one for auto deploy. Something to keep in mind, though, if you start to struggle with network connectivity after auto deploy completes the build. The next step up, once the device gets its DHCP address, it's going to point to a TFTP server. And if you get failures there, easiest way to debug that is to get a client and make sure it works. If you're using Linux on CentOS, it's just yum install TFTP, and it works kind of like FTP. TFTP server name, get file name, and you either get the file or you don't. And if you're using SolarWinds, you can take a look at the log and see if the session's even starting, or go back and take a look at your firewall or your network or whatever you need to see what the problem is there. Absolutely, if TFTP isn't working for your client, it's probably not going to work for the host either. Next up in the stack, DHCP. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that Graham Mitchell wanted to add to set the IP helper across subnets.
Yes, if you're crossing for DHCP.
Yes, yeah.
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 I'm going to get into DHCP here. First thing I always make sure is that you restart DHCP. If you know you made a change, you definitely need to, but if you're not sure, go ahead and restart it anyway, just to make sure. And then check to make sure that it's providing those addresses. Make sure you got IP helper on if you're crossing. Put a VM in this correct scope in the VLAN to make sure that it's there. And that's the whole reason I had that test VM. When I was setting all this stuff up, first thing I did after I got everything ready to go was power on my test VM, which uses DHCP, and make sure it gets an address. If it doesn't get an address and it's in the VLAN where your VM hosts are going to be, you're going to have a problem. And then worst case scenario, use TCP dump. I've got a lot more details on my blog than I'm going to show you now, but I'm going to take a quick dive into the blog and show you a few things. So TCP dump is very verbose, and that's why I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but here's a command you can run that'll grab all the TCP or all the DHCP packets, and I'm running this from the DHCP server in this case. You can do spanning or whatever you need to get it over to another client if that's where you want to run it. If you're using Windows, use Wireshark. Should be able to, I think, use a similar statement there. I mostly use TCP dump and Wireshark. Once you get it set up, here's what it looks like. Here's the packet from the client, which has no address, out to the broadcast, trying to get a DHCP address. And you can see here the MAC address it had. So this is packet 1. Packet 2, this is the reply from the server. So we see the server IP going back to the broadcast, and we see the MAC address here. So if you've got multiple devices on the network, that's how you can kind of associate the sessions. Up at the top, we see it's given out an IP address. server IP is the next server, or option 66. Down here in the middle, you've got all the other options like name servers and such that are being handed out. And then here is option 67. So if you're looking at your DHCP and you're wondering why it's not going to a TFTP boot and you don't see that option or this option here, that's probably why. All right. Now, I've already mentioned a lot about how host profiles can be a problem. A couple more tips on that. Host profiles, if you apply them at a cluster level, it overrides anything that you try and attach to the VM host. Now, in the web client, it won't allow you to attach it to the VM host since it's getting it from the cluster. But with your auto-deploy rule, you could try and do it, and then when you look in your vSphere web client, you're going to see the wrong profile attached. And it's just because when it added it to the cluster, it took off the profile that you gave it during deploy, and it attached the cluster one. That's fine. If you want to have the auto-deploy profile show, if you are deploying 800 machines, it's probably more important to have auto-deploy get the right profile on it and keep it that way. So make sure you don't have a profile attached to the cluster. And it's also very helpful if, like me, in your home lab, you've got mixed hardware. You don't want to have a single profile attached at the cluster level because it's either not going to be specific or one of the hosts is going to have a problem. So that's a good tip there. And as I said before, if it's not applying properly and you're getting those red marks, you want to get them away. You don't want to deploy things even though they work with red flags. So find what what it's saying is failing. Usually it'll say like, oh, the IP addresses are wrong, the number of routes don't match up, or there's an issue with an HBA, something like that. Figure out the suspect items, uncheck that whole section, and then start re-enabling one at a time and recheck compliance until things are where you want it to be. And then at least once you identify the issue, then you can start looking at the settings for that, that part and see what you need to fix. It does take a lot of time. So I've got two other recommendations on host profiles before you get bogged down in that. First is check the KB, the VMware KB. Saw two things come across Planet V12N in the last 30 days alone. These are two pretty nasty bugs if you're using auto-deploy. Not having vMotion enabled on the ports that you need it enabled on, and not having a default gateway after a reboot. Those seem like pretty big problems. So make sure you check and make sure you're not running into one of those problems before you overanalyze your host profile. And then the other thing that I mentioned before, you get 95% of the way there with your host profile and you can't get that other 5% to work. You've spent a couple hours on it. If you can get it done in one line in PowerCLI, you don't need to use host profiles exclusively. It's not the be-all, end-all. VMware knows it's buggy, so you shouldn't try and make everything fit there. Use the appropriate tool. A one-liner in PowerCLI beats 8 hours working in host profiles by a long shot. So those are my suggestions for troubleshooting, and I've got one more slide. Anything before I move on, Damien?
No, sir.
Okay. So here's the bonus slide. I didn't see this covered in any of the tutorials out there, so I thought this would be helpful for some people. If you really don't want to be running Windows in your vCenter segment, or you're working in a constrained resource environment, you can use the VCSA, and it does auto-deploy as well. Add a Linux server with even as little as 128 meg of RAM that can host DHCP and TFTP. And now, unless you're using VUM, which you really don't need to because you're using auto-deploy, you're Windows free. It can fit in under 4.5 gig of RAM. So pretty nice for home labs that are resource constrained. The way to get that done, if you've already got DHCP, hopefully you've got that. If not, make sure you got DHCP too, but the important part is TFTP. Install the TFTP server package with CentOS. If you're using a Debian-based distro, I know it has a different name, I just don't know what it is. But one of the prereqs is XINetD. That's a service that will respond on UDP 69 and fire off TFTP for you. You have to undisable it in the config, and I'll show you what I mean by that. make sure that xinetd is enabled and set to start on server boot. You still have to deploy or grab the deploy files and unzip them in the TFTP root. That non-password protected URL, you can easily just do a wget with that URL, chuck it in TFTP root and unzip it. You don't have to worry about transferring files from host to host. And if the TFTP server is the same as the DHCP server, you don't need to set next server. It will implicitly use the DHCP server as the TFTP server IP address. I recommend being explicit. It becomes self-documenting. If at some point in the future you re-IP your network, it's something you'll have to update. But also if you split your services between DHCP and TFTP, it's very explicit so you can see it and make sure you update it in your config. And we'll take a quick look at that. So over here, we'll take a look. I've already got xinetd configured. If I do a service xinetd status, we can see it's already running, but I can't tell whether or not TFTP is going to work. I found this is pretty cool. This works on CentOS or Red Hat distros. I don't know if this works elsewhere. When you type check config, if you've used Linux, you know it'll show you all the services that are installed and whether they're set to start at different run levels. A nice thing is, it does that for all of these services, but for xinetd, it adds in this little bit down here. It shows you the different services that xinetd provides and whether or not they're enabled or not. So that's very helpful. We can see that TFTP is enabled, so we're good to go here. Now, the TFTP config, it's all in a single file. Everything's under etc xinetd.d. Each of those services has its own file. And here's what I mean by undisable. For some reason, instead of the key being enable, the key is disable, and the base value is yes. So when it says yes, it means no. So when it says no, it means yes. So it can be a little confusing at times, but make sure you've got the set to no. Make sure when you run check config, it says that it's on. Just found that a little intriguing detail there. And that's all I've got on auto deploy. A few acknowledgments. When I was spending time researching auto deploy, I started out with Vlad Seged's blog. He did a couple articles on auto deploy as well. He's got a great blog with tons of other information out there. Recommend that if you haven't viewed that. And of course the VMware docs. They're very complete. They're very likely to put you to sleep, but when you need the answer, they're the best place to go. And of course, vBrownbag community. Really mean it. You guys do rock. I'm a long-time listener, first-time presenter. I was a little nervous getting ready for this, but it was a lot of fun putting this together. I hope people enjoyed it, and I hope if anybody else is thinking about presenting, you go through it. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I learned a lot putting this together as well.
Cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. This has been a great podcast. Thank you. I'm checking on the Twitters, and I'm pretty much seeing a bunch of nonsense. Jeremiah Dooley's fitting in well with the vBrownbag crew by talking a lot of nonsense on Twitter. Way to go, Jeremiah. And I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised within the webinar, so I believe that wraps it up. Give me one moment. Let me see who's on next week. This is a lesson, kids. Always be prepared. Let's see. April 23rd, we're going to have VMware Desktop as a Service with Chris Boyd. And that's going to be next Wednesday, April 23rd at 7:30 p.m. Central. So thanks, everybody. Looking forward to talking to you guys next time. And if you need anything in the meantime, hit us up at vBrownbag or with hashtag vBrownbag on Twitter. Thank you. Have a good night.